Great. So we're going to start now. And thank you all for coming to this panel that we've called Toyota, Sony, and Sushi, Nikkei and the Japan boom in the United States. So I'm Lon Kurashige. I organized this panel. I'm very happy that it's turned out so wonderful and that the panelists are all here. It's been a long time in planning, so thank you for sticking with me and for my multiple emails to you all. And thank you for coming and joining us today. You know, it's funny, just very briefly about the origins of this panel. When I was doing my dissertation in the early 90s on the history of the Nisei Week Festival, which is the largest Japanese festival in Los Angeles, I was looking at the photos from the 1960s Nisei Week album, or the souvenir book. And there are all these little Toyo pet cars in the Nisei Week parade. And I thought, those must be like early Toyota cars. And so it made me think there must be some kind of connection that the Japanese American community had with Toyota. And so it just kind of planted something in my head, like what is this connection? And then when I was working at the Japanese American National Museum, writing that dissertation, Sony donated 10 million or lots of money in terms of technology. So all the screens you saw at the time and everything was all donated from Sony. And they told me, oh yeah, the former chairperson, Akio Morita, felt really indebted to Nikkei. And there was a real connection there. So all of these seeds were planted a long time ago. So I'm really happy that they're coming to some fruition today in this panel. So I want to thank our main sponsors, which is the USC Shinzo Ito Center for Japanese Religions and Cultures. Our co-sponsors, USC Center for International Studies, USC's History Department, and USC's East Asian Studies Center, of which you see many of the staff here and organizing the reception. So thank you, Grace, and your staff. The schedule for today is we're going to have 4 speakers talk. First, it's going to be Saori Katada, and then John. And I'll introduce each one of them before they speak. Then John Kaji, then Shawn Layden, then Atsuko Kanai. And then after that, if we have time, I'm going to engage them in about 20 minutes of discussion, and they can talk amongst themselves as well and ask questions. And then we're going to open it up to the audience to ask questions. If just logistics, if you're interested or if you need to use the restrooms, they're to the left outside the door. And fortunately for our talk today, the Consul General of Japan in Los Angeles, Consul General Sone, is able to be with us. So let me just give him a brief introduction, and he's going to give us some opening remarks. So Consul General Sone Kenko became Consul General of Japan in Los Angeles in September 2022, following an assignment at the Ministry of Foreign Affairs Assistant, as the Ministry of Foreign Affairs Assistant Minister and Director General for Cultural Affairs. Since 1989, Sone-san's diplomatic career has taken him to Geneva, New Delhi, and now 3 locations in the US, beginning with Wesleyan University. Were you a student at Wesleyan?
It's been 2 years.
Oh, in Connecticut. Oh, great. Serving multiple times in the sphere of economic affairs in the context of North America, the OECD, the international economy, and specifically of the US and India, as well as ambassador in charge of economic diplomacy. Sone-san has worked as Deputy Cabinet Secretary for Public Affairs, Director of Global Communications in the Prime Minister's Office, and Deputy Director General for Asian and Oceania Affairs. So, Consul General Sone, please.
All right. Thank you, Professor Kurashige. Thank you for inviting me. My name is Kenko Sone, Consul General of Japan in Los Angeles. Well, I just heard from in explaining my careers, he talked about I was working at the Prime Minister's office. So in 2015, I think Prime Minister visited Los Angeles and came to this campus. I was fortunate I was together with him, came to this campus, and that is my very first time to come to the USC. And so nice to be back. Well, of course, I've already come several occasions to this campus, including the class Katada Sensei, Professor Katada. And well, thank you very much for organizing this wonderful event, talking about the Japanese American Nikkei experience over there, how they can contribute to the Japanese companies and businesses and cultures to be flourished in this region. I'm Consul General. My job is, first, there are three jobs I've been doing. First one, to support Japanese national and Japanese businesses here to be more active in this region and to help some Japanese people living here. Los Angeles, this region is the largest Japanese nationals living in the foreign countries. They're covered by one consulate, so it's larger than New York or the Hawaii. And also the Japanese companies here is the largest investor in this region, more than 2,000 companies located here, creating more than 70,000 jobs here in this region. So it's really a big presence in this region. And the second one is to communicate or collaborating with Japanese American community. Here in Japanese Americans, the largest in North America means, in Hawaii maybe more Japanese Americans, and then South Africa, South America, there is Brazil, more Japanese descendants. But in North America continent, I think Los Angeles is the largest Japanese American communities, and they're so active. So I've been working together with Japanese American community, working together for further strengthening our bilateral relations. The third one is to much larger communities, various communities like the Latinos, or the African Americans, and Jewish, whatever, the Asian Americans. So those are the three, focusing on the community-related activities that we're working. And today's topic is related to the first and second job I'm dealing so that the Japanese Americans, Nisei, is really working for helping Japanese businesses. After coming here, I've been learning a lot of things about the Japanese American history, especially during the World War II. They have been really hard time to overcome that situations. But even after that, there are several difficulties which I'm still not yet learned much about the history of after the World War II, how the Japanese Americans do it. I think the journal is also working on it. So today is a good occasion for me to learn more about Japanese Americans working together with Japanese businesses, Japanese cultures to flourish in this region. And I'm very much looking forward to today's discussion. Thank you very much.
So, thank you, Council General Sone. So before we proceed to the panels, we have a little special, what can you call it, honoring of one of our panelists today. So I'm going to invite Josh Goldstein, my colleague in the History Department, who's the chair of East Asian Studies Center, and Ceres Bostros McDowell from USC Development.
Hi all, thank you so much for coming this afternoon, and we're really honored to get to piggyback on this, being one of the sponsors for this event. We get to present the gift to John Kaji. He's been invaluably supportive of the East Asian Studies Center and continues to be, and we'd like to give a gift for he's made a really generous donation to the John Kaji Family East Asian Studies Center Fellowship Fund, which will enable us in the coming years to be able to have students join our Global East Asia Study Abroad programs in Japan and otherwise. And make it available not just to all students, regardless of their financial background, which is really absolutely crucial to making this program flourishing as it does. And students absolutely love it. And your donation couldn't come at a more important time. We really are extremely grateful. So this is just a small token of our appreciation.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Appreciate it. Oh. Thank you. So, John, we're still waiting for that basketball court that you're going to endow to remember that one. So I'm going to introduce the first panelist, my colleague and friend for many, many years here at USC, Saori Katada. She's going to give a talk called US-Japan Connections. So Saori is Professor of International Relations at USC and currently Director of Center for International Studies. She served as Vice President of International Studies Association and on the editorial team of Review of International Political Economy, a journal. Her single-authored book, Japan's New Regional Reality, Geoeconomic Strategy in the Asia-Pacific, was published by Columbia University Press in 2020, and its Japanese version was published from Nikkei Press in 2022. Her other single-authored book, Banking on Stability, Japan and the Cross-Pacific Dynamics of International Financial Crisis and Management, came out with the University of Michigan in 2001 and received the Masayoshi Ohida Memorial Book Award. For her research on regionalism, she was awarded the Asia Studies Fellow. She was awarded the Asia Studies Fellow at East West Center in Washington, D.C., Japan Foundation Research Grant and National Endowment for Humanities Fellowship. Those are all different fellowships. She has her PhD from University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill in political science and BA from Hitotsubashi University in Tokyo. Before joining USC, she served as researcher at the World Bank in Washington, D.C., and as international program officer in the UNDP in Mexico City. So, Saori, please. Oh, let me pull up here.
Yeah, thanks. Yep. Great. Thank you. Thank you, Lon, for a generous introduction. And I would like to thank Kaji-san, too. I used to teach this Global East Asia, taking my USC students to Japan, 8 times maybe? Yes. Something like that, to Meiji. I actually worked to set it up. And as I see all these students benefiting so much from that experience, I'm really grateful for all your help. Thank you. Thank you again. So very happy to be here. Good afternoon, and thank you for coming. This is a very exciting event. But my role here is actually to just set the stage. I'm not an expert on Japanese-American history like Lon is, and all the people who's on the panel who had a deep knowledge and experience about the businesses and the connection between Japan and US. My expertise is mostly on the kind of more macro level kind of interaction between Japan and the United States in a kind of trade and investment. So I would like to give a bit of a context of what these people with the in-depth knowledge of what's going on could be talking about after my presentation. So this is just covering US-Japan political and economic relations. You probably have seen this picture. This is a picture from actually 1981. This is where the United Auto Workers, Chapter 588 of the Ford Motor Company, is bashing this 1975 Toyota. And Lon just talked about how Toyota was prevalent in the context of the Asian, the kind of Japanese-American festivals and so on and so forth. It was also in the context of US-Japan trade conflict. Japan and US had various conflicts, but this is the kind of economic iteration of it in the 1980s. This was a time when Japan was bashed in various ways in terms of unfair trade practices and inundating the American market with cheap goods. And afterwards, it has gotten much more competitive, and that is what was capturing all the anger by the part of the American workers. Meanwhile, the time has passed, so this was about 30, 40 years almost ago. Now the trade deficit between Japan and the United States doesn't show the same kind of prevalence. So this is the data from US bilateral trade deficit. And the gray one is the total trade deficit and how much Japan and China captures in that deficit. So i.e., how much US is importing from these countries minus how much they are exporting, and the percentage of their US's total deficit, and how much Japan and China are contributing to it. So the red one is, I guess we probably should switch the color, but red one is Japan, and the blue one is China, where Japan used to capture almost half of American trade deficit in the late 1970s into 1980s. While as the kind of things progressed in the almost late 1990s into 21st century, Japan's deficit, which was capturing almost all of it, declined quite drastically. Meanwhile, the China one, the blue one, which used to capture only not even around 0%, around the time that Japan was really catching the headline, has increased quite significantly. By now, it's about 50% of kind of the trade deficit. Well, 40-50% of trade deficit that U.S. has bilaterally in the trading of goods would be going, kind of coming from China. So now Japan's kind of hovering around 10%, which is not very significant. Obviously, this is the kind of in the context of the change of economic power between Japan and China. So this is the United States, the blue, sorry, different colors. United States blue, and then China is the kind of the kind of orangish, and then Japan the other kind of grayish color, where this is how much these economies capture within the global economy. So yes, obviously the ratio of U.S. capturing the global the U.S. economy capturing in the global economy has declined, so has Japan's, while China's increase is quite significant. Meanwhile, that kind of story of Japan's somewhat of a retreat in terms of the economic might it used to have in the global economy, masks the kind of importance that Japan has had in the context of the U.S. economy. So this is very recent data coming from JETRO, looking at the foreign direct investment, FDI, sorry for the acronym, FDI is foreign direct investment into the United States. And you can imagine, yes, Japan probably has very significant direct investment in the US, but did you imagine that it's the number one now? In 2020, Japan captures $679 billion in foreign direct investment into the United States, which is above and beyond Canada, Germany, or UK. UK used to be by far the largest direct investors into the United States. Now Japan is number one in that sense. And if you look a bit closely, and this is not global direct investment, but Japan looking at the within the Indo-Pacific countries, again, by far the largest investor within the United States. Even if you look, China kind of captures headline, but if you look all the way down, what is it, the third one or the fourth one from the top, that green one you probably can't even see the kind of how much the China captures within the direct investment going into the United States. If you look at the component of these direct investment, many of the automobiles and computer products and things like that are very much the large portion of it, as well as various other industries, chemical, plastic, and various rubber and various other things. These are the greenfield investment that goes into the United States. Then overall, so this is a kind of part that gives a backdrop to how important Japanese American businesses and connections are making the difference within the bilateral relationship between Japan and the United States. Just to give a little bit more flavor to what's going on between Japan and US, this is coming from the Congressional Research Service of just recently. What are the kind of other common interests? Obviously, United States and Japan are the most important alliance partners within the Indo-Pacific. The military component is quite significant there too. Also, Japan and US have a significant collaboration in various ways involving South Korea these days too, where, and in the context of many uncertainties and instabilities in the region, as well as building various rules-based order, including free trade agreement and many of the kind of economic initiatives that's going on around the Indo-Pacific. Finally, these days, Japan and US are very good friends. This is from the Pew Research Center, where they do a lot of public opinion research. And if you look at the comparison between 1989, which was the kind of high time of trade, so that's the top, what do you call it, the black box, compared to the 2015, the kind of kind of trade relationship, and it's clearly improved. So it used to be that U.S. didn't see Japan as a fair trader. U.S. thought this was unfair practice was prevalent, as well as so these are the kind of two components that basically flipped in 2015, where U.S. see Japan to be a fair trader, and also kind of the unfair kind of concern has reduced. And what's more impressive is the favorability rate, how U.S. trusts Japan. So this is the one on the left side of the round circle is 68%, while Japanese trust U.S. quite significantly, 75%. So altogether, this is a really strong bonding of these two countries, and definitely the Japanese-American communities has been a significant kind of interlocutor and a catalyst of this very strong relationship. Just want to...
What do you attribute that to? Do you have a sense as to why public opinion has shifted?
Well, so obviously during the time of the economic tension in the 1980s, that was the clear component of it. Now there is no, you don't. I think Sone-san always talks about this. This is a kind of very good time of Japan-U.S. relations, because the economic relations is very strong without a major tension. I mean, there are a few pockets like Nippon Steel now and then things like that's going on, but it's been very strong, and it's a mutually beneficial relationship, and I think that's been recognized as such. And obviously having a big rival and concern, which is China, that kind of makes the bond even stronger, it seems to me. Yeah, so I would like to end with this just a plug. So I think Lon told us that I used to be a fellow at the East-West Center of Washington. They produce every few years they produce Some Country Matters for U.S. and Japan is one of the major ones. So this is the booklet that just came out in November last year. This is the Japan Matters for United States, and if this is like a 20-page booklet. If you look at it, it will have a disaggregated information about which state trade how much, investment, people-to-people relations, many of the components. So if you're interested in knowing more about how Japan matters to the United States, this would be a very good resource to tap into. So I would like to stop here and thank you again. I should sit somewhere.
Okay, thank you, Saori. So our next speaker is John Kaji. And he's going to talk about, he has a very elaborate title. Let me switch to his presentation here. Okay, hold on a sec, John. I have a long introduction for you.
Oh, okay.
So you can see it. The Prisoner, the Crown, and the Prince, how a struggling Nisei CPA and an unknown Japanese company helped each other in 1950s America. So John, his current iteration is he's a politician. He's a member of the City of Torrance, Council, elected in June 2022, representing District 1. Yay for District 1. I think that's North Torrance, he said,
yes, it is.
Right? John is president of Kaji and Associates, a commercial real estate brokerage firm based in Torrance, California. He served as director of the State of California Office of Trade and Investment in Tokyo from 1993 to 1999 under Pete Wilson, Governor Pete Wilson. During his tenure, his office transacted more than $1.9 billion in foreign direct investment into California, sort of what Saori was talking about, along with California exports into Japan and South Korea. In 2022, Kaji was instrumental in pushing this university, USC, to issue an official apology to the former Nisei students and their family members for intentionally withholding their student transcripts and preventing them from returning to USC following the end of World War II. So when many other universities were giving honorary degrees to their Nisei students who were, during World War II, forced to go into concentration camps, USC really didn't follow the flock until people like John pushed them after many, many years and many different administrations as well to step up and do the right thing. John's father, which you'll hear a lot about, I think, in this talk, Bruce Kaji, was founder of the Japanese American National Museum over here in Little Tokyo. In 1960, Bruce was elected treasurer in the city of Gardena, making him the first Nisei elected to public office in the mainland United States. And John's maternal grandfather, Dr. Kikuo Tashiro, was a pioneer Issei medical doctor who established the Japanese Hospital of Los Angeles after prevailing in US Supreme Court ruling in 1926 that allowed Japanese immigrants to form corporations. So, John Kaji.
Thank you, Lon, and I'm always happy to come back to USC because, after all, I'm a graduate. Right on. But thank you and welcome to this presentation today. And I was hoping that you might be a little bit intrigued by this title. So as I go through this, I'm also doing this sort of like a home movie. So I'm not approaching this as an academic, but as the son of a Nisei CPA who grew up watching this happen in real time. So I'd like to acknowledge a few sources. First, the Kaji family collection at Cal State Dominguez Hills in the Girth Archives. Jive Bomber, A Sentimental Journey, written by Bruce Kaji with Sharon Yamato back in 2010. And then a book written by Mr. Akira Kawahara, The Origin of Competitive Strength, published in 1995. And Mr. Kawahara was a senior executive in Toyota. Prior to that, he was a bureaucrat in the Ministry of International Trade and Industry and a graduate of Tokyo Imperial University. First, the prisoner. Teruo Bruce Kaji was born in 1926 in Los Angeles, California. And back in the 20s, taking pictures in a sailor suit was kind of like the rigor here in the United States. The Kaji family was poor. Bruce remembered being dropped in dumpsters at the Central Market to look for discarded edible food during the Great Depression. Later on, the Kaji family moved to Boyle Heights, which, as I wrote there, it was LA's Ellis Island. It was a melting pot of many different ethnicities. And it was the one place where non-white people could buy homes. So they moved into Boyle Heights, and eventually they bought a house under the name of the eldest daughter, who was an American citizen. As many of you know, upon the bombing of Pearl Harbor that launched the United States into World War II, but also as a result of World War II, President Franklin Roosevelt signed Executive Order 9066, which led to the expulsion of Japanese Americans from the West Coast. So this is a picture in front of the historic Nishi-Honganji Temple on First Street and Central Avenue in Little Tokyo. So Bruce and his family, after the signing of Executive Order 9066, were sent to Manzanar, California, one of the 10 concentration camp relocation centers in the United States. So this is a picture of one of the guard tower sentries at Manzanar. Bruce graduated from Manzanar High School in 1944. This is a picture of Bruce standing in front of his residence, one of the barracks, at Manzanar. But as he told me, in spite of being in the camp, he always tried to be optimistic about life. And as I wrote here, he's always, for some reason, he's always smiling. Next, there he is smiling again. Bruce entered the United States Army in 1944, and he was sent to the Military Intelligence Service Language School to become a Japanese linguist. The Military Intelligence Service was comprised of a lot of Nisei, some Kibe or Japanese Americans who lived in Japan. And so they were recruited and trained to serve as interpreters, translators, and were sent into the Pacific Theater of Combat. This is a picture of the Daiichi Mutual Insurance Building in Tokyo. This building was a strategic location. It served as the general headquarters for General Douglas MacArthur, who was the Supreme Commander of Allied Forces in Japan. Bruce and his fellow Nisei linguists lived in the Nihon Yusen building, which was close to the Daiichi headquarters building. So here he is standing in front of the Imperial Palace, smiling once again. Bruce thought he was going to be stationed in Tokyo for a good length of time. However, at that same time, the War Crimes Tribunal hearings were launched in Manila in the Philippines in 1946. So Bruce and his other Nisei linguist friends were transferred to Manila. And during that time, Bruce served as a translator, and during that time he interrogated Japanese military prisoners to corroborate evidence for war crimes. And during that period, all of the Nisei linguists lived in a compound which was surrounded by barbed wire to protect them from the Filipino population, because they couldn't tell if they were Japanese military or allies. And so Bruce's recollection was that, I just spent 3 years behind barbed wire in America. I'm not going to spend any more time behind barbed wire here in the Philippines. So at the earliest possible opportunity, he said, I want to get out of the Army, which led him to USC, where he enrolled under the GI Bill, which paid for his tuition, and he graduated with a degree in accounting in 1950. Next, we move on to the crown. What is this? This is a Toyota Crown Toyopet, which was the first car manufactured by Toyota for the consumer. So at first, Toyota's focus was on the domestic market in Japan. However, Mr. Shotaro Kamiya, who was named as president of Toyota Motor Sales Company in Japan, also known as the god of sales within Toyota, helped to convince the company that they should look abroad and that the best market for the sales of their cars would be America. So a team, including Mr. Kamiya and 2 other Toyota executives, were sent to Los Angeles and also traveled throughout the US to see what the market was like for Toyota. So during that time, Bruce was introduced to the Toyota executives who needed a Japanese-speaking CPA. And so Bruce was contacted by both the Japanese consulate in Los Angeles and also one of his attorney friends, a Japanese-speaking attorney, and they both said, Bruce, this company needs your help. And at the time, Bruce created his own accounting firm, and he really needed the business. Now, Bruce, along with other Niseis, tried to get jobs with the major accounting firms. However, there was an unwritten policy at that time that the big 8 accounting firms would not hire Asians, especially Japanese. So they were forced, like my father, to create their own companies. So this is a picture of Bruce standing in front of a pink Crown Toyota, in the showroom at Hollywood Toyota, which was their first dealership. Now, Bruce saw how sales were not going, and so guess what he decided to do? He said, you know what? I think I'm going to buy one of these. So this is a picture of my mother, Frances, holding my brother, Troy. My sister's in the back seat. So here you have a Toyota Crown with the suicide doors. They open out. And this is in Gardena, circa 1961. And my dad said, Frances, here's your new car. I think it was 3 on the column, 3 gears on the column, no seat belts. And I remember as a kid, I'd stand up in the back seat behind my mom as she's driving, shifting gears through the streets of Gardena. Never flew through the windshield. What did Bruce drive? Bruce drove a Cadillac because in 1950s America, that was status. And everyone wanted status, and it wasn't a Toyota. So Bruce had his accounting practice based in Gardena, and one of his clients operated what was called Gardena Speedway. Now, back in the 50s and 60s, they had things called demolition derbies. They had races around this dirt oval track. Gardena had 2 tracks. One was Gardena Speedway, the other was Ascot. And you had people showing up to drive in these, Parnelli Jones, A.J. Foyt, Carroll Shelby. These are names from American automotive history. They were in Gardena. Bruce decided, you know what? Because KTLA Channel 5 covers these demolition derbies, I think I'm going to get Toyota to bring their car out. So here's a picture of Bruce with the owner of the Speedway on live TV, the first time Toyota was ever on local television in America. And once again, he's smiling. Also at the same event, there's a Toyota Crown on the left and an Indy car on the right. So this Indy car was driven by a well-known race car driver, Johnny Parsons, number 98, and it was the first time the Toyota executives had ever seen an Indy race car. But it gave him some ideas. Now at this time, Bruce, we were living in the city of Gardena, and some of his local friends in Gardena said, you know what, Bruce, there's an election coming up in Gardena. Would you consider running for elected office for the city treasurer? And he goes, I don't really know. I'm not really a politician. This is something that is outside of accounting. Well, in talking to his friends at Toyota, they said, Bruce, you should run for office. And so the executives, including Mr. Kawahara, they pulled out their pen and wrote these. This is one example. In calligraphy, these are the words Hisho, or certain victory, that was presented to Bruce, and on the side it says Beikoku Toyota Jidosha, or Toyota Motor Sales USA. And so Bruce used to think, well, you know what? Okay, with the support of the Toyota people, I think I'm going to win. So he was elected in 1960 and became the first Japanese American elected official on the mainland US. Following his win, Bruce got a call from one of the Los Angeles County supervisors, Kenneth Hahn. And so in 1960, Bruce went to the Board of Administration, which is now named after Kenneth Hahn, to be congratulated by Kenny Hahn. So now he's a politician, accountant. And he told his Toyota friends, well, I don't know what this is going to lead to, but Kenny Hahn one day called Bruce and said, Bruce, we're going to have a VIP visiting Los Angeles, and you need to be there with me when this VIP arrives at LAX. The Prince. This is a picture, and it's a very interesting picture. In the background, I don't know if you could see it, but it says United States Air Force. This is before there was a Japan Airlines. So the Crown Prince of Japan, Crown Prince Akihito, flew to the United States, stopped in Los Angeles. Now what's really, let me explain some backstory on this picture. It's 1961. Supervisor Hahn is there, the mayor of Los Angeles are there to welcome the Crown Prince. Bruce is in line. Kenny Hahn says, Bruce, come here. You got to say hi to the Crown Prince. He goes, okay. So he's standing there just saying, welcome. No, Bruce, get over there. Shake his hand. So Bruce, okay. So this is when the picture was taken. Now, you have to put it in historical context. It's the Crown Prince of Japan. In Japan, no, you would never shake the hand of the Crown Prince or the Emperor. It just doesn't happen. And so what he told me later on, there are a number of Japanese Americans there to welcome the Crown Prince. When he did that, suddenly he heard this gasp in the audience. Bruce kept smiling. Toyota fails for the moment. This is a letter, and I know you can't read it, but let me explain what this letter is. Bruce was corresponding with his friends at Toyota. Some of them had since returned to Tokyo. And in a letter written to him in August of 1961, one of the executives, Mr. Junkichi Goto, wrote him a personal letter. How are you? I enjoyed my time in Los Angeles. I'm sorry I went to Las Vegas. I lost a lot of money. Ha, ha, ha. And then here it says, I am sorry that Toyota USA has declined step by step in spite of our endeavoring and many good friends who helped us, who have gone away from the company. It seems to me that Toyota has no hope nor future in the USA anymore, to my regret. This is basically caused by the gap of industrial power between the US and Japan. However, Toyota has adapted and learned a lot of things in endeavoring to do in doing auto businesses in the US. So I found this in my father's records, and this is now at Cal State Dominguez. But this is at a special point in Toyota history in America. No one wanted the Crown. It was underpowered. It couldn't drive on the freeways. It was a failure. And they said, we're pulling up. They decided to lay off staff. But they still had dealers, and they said, well, the only car that we have left is our Land Cruiser. So we'll keep selling Land Cruisers to farmers in America because they seem to like it. But we're pulling the plug on the Crown. Later in 1961, Bruce took his mother, Katsu, to Japan. First time she had been back in Japan since immigrating to the US just after World War I. So this is a picture of Bruce and his mother being entertained by Mr. Junkichi Goto, Akira Kawahara, and their wives on a trip to Gifu, the Nagara River. And during that trip, Bruce and my grandmother toured the Toyota plant. And after returning to Gardena, he went to see his buddy who owned a Chevrolet dealership in Gardena, and he said, you know what, I think you should get into Toyotas. They're a piece of junk. I don't want to sell Toyotas. I said, no, I see what's happening in Japan, and I really think you need to worry about Toyota. So this last slide is full circle. Back during the World's Fair held in Nagoya, at that event, my father attended a reception which included Toyota executives. At the time, so he came back, but at that same event, unknown to him was Mr. Akira Kawahara, who he met first in 1957. So a note came back to the Japanese American National Museum saying, Mr. Kawahara would like to make contact with Bruce Kaji. I happened to take a trip back to Japan. I made contact with Mr. Kawahara and this Mr. Matsuda, who was with the Toyota Auto Museum. Met him in Tokyo. I think we were in Roppongi Hills, had a nice lunch. And at that time, Mr. Kawahara told me directly, I don't know if you know what your dad did for us, but without his help, I don't think we would have succeeded in our first entry into the US market. So with that concludes my remarks. The prisoner, the crown, and the prince. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you, John. Our next speaker, Shawn Layden, is not going to have a PowerPoint, right, Shawn? Or Shawn?
No PowerPoint.
No PowerPoint. He's doing it the old-fashioned way. So let me just
I'll use the whiteboard.
shut this down for a little bit for you. And let's see, how do I hide this? Let me just put it back here. Okay, so let me introduce Shawn. Shawn's title of his talk is Made in Japan, The Life and Times of Akio Morita, Sony co-founder. Shawn is the former chairman of PlayStation Worldwide Studios for Sony Interactive Entertainment, SIE, where he was responsible for driving first-party content to differentiate the PlayStation platform and played a key role in launching PlayStation consoles globally. At lunch today, I took a selfie with Shawn to share with my son, who's a huge PlayStation gamer. Prior to serving as chairman, Layden was CEO of SEI America, leading the PlayStation business in the US, Canada, and Latin America. Earlier in his career, he also served as president of SEI Japan and was vice president for international software development at SEI Europe. His 32-year career with Sony began with corporate roles in Tokyo, including 5 years as personal assistant to Akio Morita, co-founder of Sony Corporation. Shawn currently serves as strategic advisor to Tencent Corporation, as well as advising several tech startups in game-adjacent fields. He is a founding member of Girls Make Games Scholarship Fund and sits on board of Women Who Code. In fact, one of his students, or one of the recipients of his scholarship is a USC student, current USC student. Layden graduated from, unlike the other members of our panel, from University of Notre Dame.
Fighting Irish.
With a BA in American Studies. That's great. He has family in Tokyo and London and divides his time amongst those cities and the San Francisco Bay Area, where he currently resides with his 2 cats. He still plays lots of video games. So, thank you, Shawn. Come tell us about Sony.
Thank you very much, Lon, for the kind introduction and mostly historically accurate, so that's good. Yes, I'm the palate cleanser today. I don't have slides, so we'll just accept what I'm going to talk about today, but this is the core of my message today. Just as a bit of background, yes, I spent the last 25 years, 32 years in Sony, the last 25 years with the PlayStation business, bringing video games to rot the minds of small children all over the planet. And prior to that, I was working in corporate at Sony. And I joined Sony in 1987, and we didn't have the term at the time, but I joined Sony as a diversity hire. Sony back then, even though we'll talk a bit more about their ambitions across the international marketplace, before that, they decided in the 80s that they need to internationalize, kokusaika. We need to internationalize our businesses. And one way to do that was to hire the white guy and put him in the communications department. So I did spend a year at Sophia University, so I did have a facility with the language. And in '87, I joined the corporate communication department in Shinagawa for Sony Corp. Communications is a great place to start for any students out there who are looking for jobs in the future. PR communications is a great sort of eagle's nest to sit in a corporation when you just join it, because you get to see everything that's going on. You get super visibility on what's happening. And being the diversity hire, I think I was 25 years old at the time, but as a 25-year-old American working in Japan, actually I got into more rooms than 25-year-old Japanese working in Japan could get into. Because like in John's story, when the Americans would come visit, later on in my life, I had to go to Narita Airport to pick up Henry Kissinger. They want to bring out the American guy to meet with the American guests. So I began in the communications department. It was a very time of change for Sony. We just launched compact disc. We just killed Betamax, comes and goes. And in about 1989, Morita-san's speechwriter had retired, and he was looking for a new ghostwriter and speechwriter. And his chief of staff came down and asked me if I would come up and join the chairman's office. At that time, my boss came to me and he said, "Don't do it, don't take this job. You'll work 25 hours a day, 8 days a week, and they're just going to kill you upstairs." And I said to him at the time, I can't say no, right? Morita-san has asked me to join. I don't want to regret 10 years later saying, what if I had said yes? So again, I tell college students all the time, have the courage to say yes. Don't turn things down. Accept every opportunity. Because if it's bad, you can quit, right? But if it turns out to be great and you've already said no, you can't get in there again. So keep that in mind. I said yes. I went on to become Mori-san's speechwriter and his ghostwriter. I wrote some articles under his name for the Harvard Business Review, for the Atlantic Monthly, a number of speeches, graduation speeches, speeches for the Trilateral Commission, etc. Being a ghostwriter is a strange job. Being a ghostwriter is one of those things that when the boss gives a great speech, they say, oh, Mori-san, that was an amazing speech. And if the speech is a little bit off, say, Mori-san, get a new speechwriter. So it's a tricky place to be, but I got to spend 5 years there, which is the closest I'll ever have to taking an MBA. It was the most effective time of my life. John talked a story about the achievements and the success and the influence of his father with Toyota here in California. In the business world, Mori-san was my father. He taught me everything I needed to know about how to go through business and try to be successful. So I joined with him and watched him tackle the US-Japan relationship. This is the late 80s, right? This is the height of, Theory Z and Japanese management and US-Japan trade friction. As Mori-san liked to say all the time about US-Japan trade friction, he would just say, the US economy and the Japanese economy, the US people and the Japanese people, they are so close. They are so in line with where they want to be. Bodies that are close create friction. If we were far apart, this wouldn't be happening. We are close. We are important to each other. That's why there's friction. That's why we have to talk. He was famous for guiding groups like the Trilateral Commission and the US-Japan Business Council. He was a very influential member of Keidanren. He was the one who led the Keidanren fund for the Japanese American National Museum, about $20 million back in the 80s. And though he's very Japanese, and we all talk about consensus, and we have to get people online, in this kind of a realm, Mori-san was just very, shall we say, Western. He just told everyone, we need money, we need a lot of it, we need it now, everyone's signing up. Next. And he got the money together, and the museum got off the ground. So he's very pleased with that, and I also try to maintain a connection with the Japanese American National Museum, as of course my family, my mother's family, were born in Lomita, California, but spent her high school years in a concentration camp in Roar, Arkansas, with her whole entire family. So it is connected to me, and so that's important as well. But Mori-san had that vision, and in Keidanren, there was a time, I don't know if anyone here is old enough to remember the American Express commercial that features Mori-san going, do you know me? And it was kind of funny because he was that famous around the world. Arguably, and I say this with respect in front of Japanese government figures that are in the room, arguably he was the most famous Japanese person of his age. Nobody's more famous around the world than Akio Morita. And he had friends all over the world. I mentioned Henry Kissinger. I also had to go pick up Leonard Bernstein and bring him to Akio Morita's house. He was that kind of person. That was his gadfly. Now, how did he become that kind of person? He started Sony in 1946, right after World War II. He and his co-founder, Masaru Ibuka, the beauty and the brains, or however you want to divide it up, Ibuka-san was amazing, amazing physicist. And they created Sony with a dream of creating a company to do things that other people don't do, to create innovations that haven't been dreamt of before. And they began with a tape recorder, and a massive tape recorder, about the size of this cabinet. And they made a commercial business out of it. They sold it to the government. They used it for teaching languages. It was a language training tool. They built their company around it. There wasn't, rice cooker was the first thing they made, but it caught fire, so they didn't sell it. Water, electricity, that's really tricky to work with. So they went with the tape recorder, and they brought that to the marketplace. Now, Sony was a new company, and as Japan's economy began to recover after World War II, the big names were back in play. Toshiba, Hitachi, Sanyo, Mitsubishi. Sony would have to find a success outside Japan. They would have to build their markets without fighting toe-to-toe on a very small archipelago of islands against these big hitters from the past and try to go out and find the future. It influenced their name. Their first name of Sony was Tokyo Tsushin Kogyo Kabushiki Gaisha. I can't even say. Can you imagine Americans saying that? So they came up with Sony. Sony was the name that would have no ethnic or any regional meaning to it. It was the same everywhere around the world. And he came to America, and he knew this market in America was going to be the first place for him to be successful. If he can make it here, he can make it anywhere, as the song says. And so he came here, and he looked around. He went to Bell Labs. He went and talked to people in a variety of industries and hit upon Bill Shockley and the team at Bell Labs and their nascent invention of the transistor. And they thought, we can do something with this. And so they put together a deal to license the transistor technology. At the time, it wasn't, they told Morita-san, all you can use this for is to make a hearing aid. And they said, no, we can do something else with that. So they licensed technology, which itself was tricky in post-war Japan, just to get the capital to move money across the Pacific Ocean. Took, MITI had to sign off on it, and other various parts of the government had to give them the go-ahead to do this deal with Bell Labs. And they did. They brought the transistor technology over. And Leo Esaki, one of the young engineers at Sony at the time, who went on to win the Nobel Prize for this work in 1972, they took that transistor technology made by Bell Labs for hearing aids and found a way to power it up and power consumption down. They used a number of, I won't go into the science behind it because I don't understand it either, but it made them possible for them to create a low power, high performance transistor, which would become the transistor radio. So they came to America with a transistor radio. Morita-san was like, here we go. This is how we're going to get in the US market. A company called Regency in America had already made the world's first transistor radio, so we can't say that. But they entered the market and left it quickly. They felt there was no opportunity here for handheld audio devices. So Morita-san comes to America. He's trying to find a deal, talking to other people in consumer products. He met with the people at Bulova. And the people at Bulova said, hey, that's interesting. We want to order 100,000 of these transistor radios for the market. And Morita-san was very excited. It's like, okay, that's a big number, but let's talk about that. And they said, but we're going to put our name on the outside. These will be Bulova transistor radios. And any nascent company, and I work with a bunch of startups in the Silicon Valley, if someone wanted to throw that kind of money at me and put their name on my product, I said, yeah, sure, go ahead, knock yourself out. But Morita-san had a different vision for Sony. And he talked to the people at Bulova and says, I can't take your deal. And I said, are you crazy? Look at the money we have here, and you're over there. And no one knows your company. Putting your name on the product won't mean anything. And he said, 50 years ago, no one knew what Bulova was. And frankly, I'm guessing no one here knows who Bulova was either. But he had the conviction of had the courage of his convictions and his purpose. He said, I'm going to bring a Sony radio out here. Thank you very much. I can't do that. Later on, he'd find another buyer who looked into his transistor radio. And they said, okay, give us pricing for 10,000, 50,000, 100,000 units. And we'll decide what we want to do. We really like your product. We want to bring it in. So he sat down. He wrote the map out. But he realized if they were going to do 100,000, they could barely do 5,000 a month at the time. So if we're going to do 100,000 a year, he said, we're going to have to double our investment in our factory. We're going to have to hire more people to make these radios, which means this is sort of anti the law of large economics. He said, okay, for 10,000, they're this much a unit. For 50,000, they're this much a unit. And for 100,000, they're that much a unit. And the guy from the retail chain goes, are you crazy? The more we buy, the cheaper it gets. That's how this works. And he says, the more you buy, the more people have to hire. The more you buy, the more infrastructure I have to build. And I don't know if you're going to buy the same 100,000 next year. And in Japan, I just can't fire people when the sales go down, right? When I take these people in, they are my family. And so if you want that many, then that's the price it's going to be to get there. He didn't get the deal, but he found some other people who would take smaller lot deals, 10,000 here, 10,000 there. And thus, the transistor radio hits the world. And Sony starts to be seen as what's coming from Japan. The Made in Japan, the reason why he titled his memoir such, he tells the story about being in Germany. And he was impressed that in the late 1950s, Germany had recovered from post-war destruction a bit faster than Japan did. And he was surprised how they were attacking the market and being successful, Siemens and the like. And he tells the story of being in a cafe in Germany and getting a little iced tea or a lemonade or whatever it was. And there's a little umbrella in the drink. And the German waiter, just to kind of make conversation, says, hey, look what your country makes, and pulls the umbrella out of the glass. See, we have Japanese goods here too. That stuck with him really hard. And that's why he named his memoir Made in Japan, because he wanted to take that image of the paper umbrella and make it the image of technology, innovation, and changing society as we know it. Morita-san went on after the time I was with him. We spent a lot of time together. This is when I met John. So here's the John Kaji connection. In 1993, John had been assigned to Japan. He was working for Governor Pete Wilson as the California State Trade Representative. And Pete Wilson wanted to meet the chairman. So I arrange it, talk with John, we get it together. I'd never met John before. Pete Wilson comes in, Morita-san's there. We go into Akasaka. There's a really lovely ryote in Akasaka, the beautiful place. The doors open up and the two the chairman and the governor, they sit down at this wonderful table, and then John and I are sent to sit at the kids' table outside, where they brought us very little food. But it was a chance for me to meet with John, but another understanding that Morita-san was that person. He connected with everybody. We said Kissinger and Bernstein earlier, and it was Pete Wilson, and it was Europeans and Americans everywhere, because his story was a simple one. It's like, we're committed to quality, we're committed to innovation. He's also committed to his employees. He would tell the opening class every year that would come into Sony, because as you know, in Japan, everyone gets hired on the same day, April 1st, right? No one gets hired in the in-between. On April 1st, you have this big meeting, and all the young Shinyushain, the newcomers, come into the room, and he would tell the same speech every year. And he'd tell the employees the same speech. It was like, thank you for coming, but remember, you chose us too. We chose you, but you chose us. And that's important, and that's the bond we have together. But you need to want to be here. And if you feel at some point you don't want to be here, you need to leave. But as long as you want to be here and contribute to this, my commitment to you is unconditional. And that really built a very strong culture at Sony to lead with his vision. He's the man who came up with the Walkman, which everybody inside Sony said, what are you, crazy? Not only is it a weird product, but Walkman, what kind of product name is that? No one's going to like that name. I don't have to tell you how that story turned out. But from there he went on. He worked with Philips, together with Philips, to create digital audio format, which both companies licensed throughout the world. He was so committed to working with quality and talent wherever he found it. It was an inspiration to all of us. Latterly in his career, he had after the ignominious defeat that Betamax suffered at the hands of VHS, Morita-san felt that, what was our miss? We did not control the content. That's what killed them. There was more content on VHS than was on Betamax. A lot of it happened to be adult content, but we won't talk about that. But Betamax had a smaller library, and ultimately, it demised. Part of the problem was they wouldn't license the format out. VHS was licensing the format to anybody. Sanyo, Toshiba, Hitachi, Panasonic, they all made it. But Sony wanted to capture that. It was a strategy that worked for the Trinitron. Sony never licensed the Trinitron technology. They felt that was the way to do it. However, you got to understand that if I have a Trinitron and you don't, we can still watch the same TV show. But if I have a Betamax, you have a VHS, we can't trade it, our tapes. And so that kind of collapsed. And he decided, for the next time they're going to take a run at the entertainment business, we need to have our own content. And so the company bought CBS Sony Records. And laterally, it bought Columbia Pictures. And Sony became the world's first hardware and software conglomerate in the technological field. Again, working with the Americans, working with CBS Records in New York, working with Columbia Pictures in Los Angeles. Morita-san's vision was always outside Japan. For the longest time, 75% of the revenue for Sony came from overseas. It never depended on the domestic market to be successful. I think his vision and his commitment and the way he helped spread his vision for management, at least through the Sony channels, about respecting the workforce, bringing people in, letting them know we're both here for the same reason. We chose you, but you chose us. His view on the world was sadly shortened, or his impact on the world was sadly shortened, coincidentally the day after I met with John and Pete Wilson, when Morita-san was 72 years old and was still doing 6:30 a.m. tennis lessons at the Shinagawa Prince. And he was struck down with a stroke and never recovered from that. And gone too soon. I mean, he did live for another 6 years, but he was not active in the company. I really think sometimes how different the 90s would have been, that dark decade for us in Japan after the bubble collapse, how different it would have been if Morita-san was still a player in that time. He had the most meaningful impact on me in my career in business, and yeah, we all miss him dearly, but he changed Japan, and I was just happy to be along for that ride. Thank you, everyone, and I'll give you to the next speaker.
Oops. Okay, our final speaker is Atsuko Kanai. Oh, there she is. You okay? Her title the title of her presentation is Sushi. Very simple. And then there's a subtitle, Exporting a Culinary Culture, the Sublime Capturing America's Wonder. Atsuko was born in Tokyo into a family destined to make a mark on the culinary advancement bridging Japan and America. The Kanai family immigrated to the US in 1964, at which point her father managed Mutual Trading Company, a Japanese food importer and wholesaler founded in 1926 by a group of 13 Little Tokyo investors. Mutual Trading Company introduced sushi and frozen edamame to America, and as a result, it is regarded as the ambassador of Japanese food to the US. Atsuko is currently the executive VP of Mutual Trading Company, as well as president of the Sake School of America, an educational center for training sake and wine enthusiasts. Under the company's mission of bridging the flavors of Japan to the people of the world, she finds the food business rewarding as a career and a personal joy in fostering culinary understanding. Atsuko attended USC, majoring in East Asian languages and cultures, which included studies abroad at a study abroad at Waseda University in Tokyo, where she discovered many of Japan's cultural experiences that she'd missed having grown up in the US. Years later, she returned to USC for an MBA degree in marketing. Atsuko Kanai.
Thank you. Thank you for the introduction. Now from the hardware to the software. Okay, so I'm going to start talking about Mutual Trading. It's a company that's almost 100 years old, and it was founded in 1926 by this gentleman, Sadagoro Hoshizaki. Oh. Is my mic on? Okay, so the company was founded in 1926. Is that okay? By Mr. Sadagoro Hoshizaki by 13 investors from the Little Tokyo area. It was operated like a co-op system. We didn't have national brands, but the buyers would go to Japan to the outskirts and buy a whole bunch of non-branded products from small growers and distributors in the area. And back in the 20s, the product line looked like this: processed food, canned, dried sauces, and canned was big. That was the shelf. That was technologically advanced because we had tofu in a can, tsukemono in a can, takuan in a can. All these pickled vegetables, everything was a can, dried or sauces in a tub. Natural products that are not processed were things like rice, chili, agar-agar, nori, seaweeds, and so forth. Dry goods, non-food items was big on silk because Japan was so advanced in the quality silk business, as well as cotton fabrics. The cotton was interesting because they were produced in the United States and then taken to Japan to be processed and back into the US. In the pottery business, the tableware and decorative products were very in. So you look at the products, the pictures on the products below. The one on the very right is the pickled. When it ferments too much, then the whole top would pop off. So they didn't know how to get that not to pop off, so they would put this twine to make it so it's not preservable, but it can last the months that takes the product to arrive in the US. Okay, now after the war, so that was before the war. After the war is when things start happening for my father. He had been coming back and forth from Japan to the US like 1 year at a time. And he said, what am I going to bring from Japan? So he said, Americans like sweets and desserts. So he found this item called Harvest Sesame Cookies. Now this is not the original one. The company went out of business, so this is a modern version of that cookie. But he took that all over the United States. And one day at a trade show in Chicago, he meets this man named Harry Wolf. You see that man? no hair. So they meet up, and Harry comes up to my dad and says, "Who are you?" He says, "I'm Kanai." "Where are you from?" "Japan." And the third question he asked was, "What religion are you?" My father's taken aback. He's not a very religious man. He said, "I guess I'm Buddhist." And he said, Harry says, "Well, what do the Buddhists believe in? What is your belief?" And he said, number one, family. And number two, we always try to do things that the other person wants us to do, like omotenashi, thinking of others before yourself. And Harry looks back and he says, "I'm Jewish, and we have a similar kind of philosophy." And he found that they struck a friendship, and by the end of the week, Harry knew that my father was trying to set up a business here in the US. He says, "Kanai, to be successful in business in America, number one, you need a good doctor. Number two, you need a good lawyer. And number three, you need a good Jewish friend." And right then and there, he got hired as a consultant for mutual trading. And the picture on the left is when they go to all these conventions selling their product. Now, during that time, he did sell the cookies, but that success was very short-lived, because with that success, American companies started to take notice, and in a few years, Nabisco had made a copycat of the product, made it in Taiwan at a cheaper price, and so his business was completely wiped out. So Harry and my father are thinking, "Gee, what should we do?" And around the same time, this is 1964, when my father arrives in LA permanently as a GM of mutual trading. And the picture on the right, that's me, the little one, in 64. And instead of going to the American market, he wants to go back to the Japanese market. However, he wants to target the restaurant business, not retail, because he thought, well, if I'm going to target the American market, I have to make them eat it first. They don't want to make it. They have to eat it first. So what quicker way would be to serve it at a restaurant where it's already prepared and people can eat. And the other thing he did was he wanted to bring modern foods to the U.S. And also Kanto-style foods. Kanto means Eastern Japan. Most of the residents in the U.S., the Japanese Americans, were from the Kansai side, which is the southern part of Japan. They had a different, culinary dishes. So he brought in things like gyoza, shumai, curry, tonkatsu, those modern types of food that were in Tokyo. And that's what he was doing at the same time his cookie business going down, 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 down. So Harry Wolf, once again, says, let's go to Asia and find the next thing and bring it back to the US. So they go to Japan. And they go to the Philippines, Hong Kong, Korea, and Singapore, and they find nothing. And they come back to Tokyo, and they check into a hotel in Ginza. And my father says to Harry, hey, you want to eat sushi? And he says, okay. My father says, oh, sushi is raw fish, you know. He says, okay, I'll go. So they go to a place called Shinnosuke Sushi behind the hotel that they were staying in. And a few days later, when they were checking out, my father was getting out the door, and all of a sudden, clack, 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 he hears this noise coming out from behind. And there was Mr. Shinnosuke, the chef, waving a white piece of paper and says, Kanai-san, you got to pay this. And it was a check for probably around $2,000, and by in those standards, that was pretty expensive. Well, anyway, he said, we already paid you. But he says, no, this is from your friend. And my father's saying, what do you mean? What had happened was that Harry had been going to Shinnosuke Sushi every single night before dinner to eat sushi as an appetizer. So my father was furious. But Harry said, no, calm down, Kanai. listen, this is something that we should bring to the United States. It's new. It's intriguing. I found it really intriguing. So, Americans, average Americans will find it intriguing. It's fun, it's fresh. Why don't we take it to the US? My father said, no. Americans don't eat raw fish. And Harry says, well, I'm Jewish. I eat raw fish. People from Europe eat raw fish, Italian, Spanish. I think we could do this. And most of all, Harry said, well, remember, we failed at cookies because people copied, but sushi, it's unique and it cannot be copied. Lately, it has been copied, but at that time, no one can copy. He says, this has a competitive edge. Let's do this. So they come back, and there's a lot of stories in between, but the first sushi bar, my father coined the word sushi bar, went up at Kawafuku restaurant. It's no longer there. It's where the Doubletree Hotel is in Little Tokyo. And they hired a chef from the Tsukiji area, the fish market area, Chef Saito and Mrs. Saito. They didn't speak a word of Japanese, English. But they came thanks to expats from Toyotas and the Sonys and all the other growing companies landing in Los Angeles. The Japanese expats brought their Americans, said the same thing. You want to eat sushi? It's raw fish. You want to try it on a dare? And that's how it really got started. The second restaurant was Eigiku. The third, Tokyo Kaikan, where the famous California roll was rolled out. And Osho is, many months later, Osho came out. That was the first restaurant that took sushi from Little Tokyo area out to Century City. Right by, next to the 20th Century Fox. And the famous actor Yul Brynner at lunchtime will bring his entourage of beautiful models and actresses, and we eat sushi every single day. So it got known to the American community at a very high level, meaning it's fashionable, it's cool, it's healthy, and wouldn't you like to be like a model or a superstar? And from then on, all these sushi restaurants started to prop up along Wilshire Boulevard all the way to Santa Monica. And they would call that the sushi row. Sushi row. And at that time, there weren't too many barriers for immigration. If you're a sushi chef, immigration, okay. And interestingly enough, in Japan at that time, most sushi chefs would have to apprentice many years before they could even, pick up a knife. So they saw Saito-san and Mrs. Saito come back after a couple of years, come back to Japan and open their own restaurant in the midst of Ginza. They said, I want to do that. And so droves of young chefs came to the United States and made this sushi roll possible down Santa Monica Boulevard. Jumping to 1980s. Right now there's a showing of The Shogun on Hulu, but that's the second rendition. The original one was in 1980. And during the 1 week that Shogun was showing on NBC, every night for a week, Japanese restaurants were deserted because everyone was glued to the television watching the Shogun. But right when it ended, it just droves and droves of people just came to the Japanese restaurants. And that's the big jump for the sushi business. I'm going to stop at talking about mutual trading then and talk about sushi. Why does it have this sustainable allure? And it's the wonder of the sublime. First of all, the proposition of sushi is that it's delicious. It's kind of addictive if you don't have it. If you're used to eating sushi all the time and during the pandemic, like you can't eat sushi anymore, people get kind of antsy and saying, oh, I have to have my sushi. Culture and art, it's very pretty. It's entertaining. The chefs, they're so smart. They could be doing this, talking to the guests and being entertaining and yet calculate how many they ate. They're very, very smart. fresh and clean. It's very nourishing, low fat and all. And it takes a professional skill, so you feel like, well, gee, I'm going to make this at home. Not possible. So it became very popular. Not only the tangibles that you get from eating sushi, there are intangibles. For instance, the sustainability of the chef's skill. The people who are eating it will be helping that, keeping that tradition alive. By eating it, you kind of join the clean lifestyle of dining healthy. Incorporating the season, in California we only have 2, but if you eat sushi, you could enjoy different types of fish that are being served in Japan. And the personalization, we like custom-made stuff. And so, can you make that with this? Can you make this without this, but put a bunch of something else? And so Americans love the personalization. Okay, is there competition to sushi? Not really. It's a culinary art. It's unique, and the history and the tradition. It's hard to argue the history and the tradition and the legacy of sushi. For instance, for the Toyotas and the Sonys, they're going towards technology, doing it faster, cheaper, better, and so forth. For the sushi chefs, they're going the other way and trying to maintain the tradition. Let's not, advance it too much so it gets all weird. Let's really preserve the historical and the traditional sushi history as it has been. So they're in 2 different trajectories. It requires skills, so not every chef of all different culinary practices can become a sushi chef, and there is no substitute. As a consumer, I have choices. I could go to a Chinese restaurant, a Thai restaurant, a French restaurant, but those are choices, but there's no substitute. Yet there are kind of drawbacks or threats. The exchange rates, as far as business is concerned, the exchange rates do a havoc to us as a distributor as well as the restaurant. There are trade embargoes and strikes like the harbor strike that we have to face every 4 or 5 years. The FDA and the government regulations for California, we're the takeout capital of the world, and we have these bento boxes that we take out. However, right now we're getting a backlash from the FDA where we can't use some of the materials that are coating the bento boxes that prevents it from sticking, called PFAS. The pandemic did a bad, it was really damaging to the industry. However, the chefs were really able to pivot, and many of them survived. Global warming is for the materials that affect the fish. The fish can migrate and they can figure it out, although it is threatening to them. But right now, our biggest threat right now is nori, seaweed. There are farms in Japan, China, and Korea. They can't, move the seaweed nori farms to elsewhere very quickly, and the temperature of the water is rising year by year. And so right now, the quality and the amount of nori that's being produced is dwindling. Okay, so what about the success and the popularity of sushi? Well, sushi didn't grow on its own. It was not a standalone success. The wa sentiment, the harmony, the peacefulness is something universal that everyone aspires to have. And so it reflects the wa sentiment of the Japanese culture. And it piggybacks on the success of the Toyotas and the Sonys. Before that would be like the cameras and the watches and the music boxes and the textiles. All those fine exports reflect the Japanese technology, culture, and the hard work that goes with making very dependable and products. And therefore, everything Japanese is nice. Sushi must be good. And so it is a holistic kind of a acceptance by the American people as well as internationally. In fact, look at this. The new hot one, 1967 Toyota Corona, hottest import sedan in America today. tops 90 miles per hour. Whoa, it's so fast. And going all the way down over 30 miles per gallon. 1967, I Googled this, and they said the gasoline prices were 35 cents per gallon. 5 years before that, it was 30 cents per gallon. So there's a big gap, but the Toyotas did it. So this is from the Hollywood Toyota Motor Company, John. So the identity of sushi, as far as the Japanese Americans are concerned, it was very difficult for the older generation, Niseis, to really, get into sushi, because at the beginning in the 60s and 70s, they said, no, thank you. I don't want anything too close to Japan. Therefore, they were kind of apprehensive. Plus, the population was from the southern part of Japan and not northern, where sushi was more prevalent. However, the younger generation, the Yonseis and Goseis of today, the youngsters, they want an identity. They want to be proud of something that they could say, hey, it's from my background. My grandmother and grandfather ate this, and this is so forth, this is this and that, and know about sushi and be able to be proud of learning about it and sharing it with their friends. So this identity, this food, in any culture is important, and I believe for the Japanese American youths that are growing today, it's not even Japanese American, it's all over in Asia, as well as we do a lot of export to Mexico and South America. Europe is kind of hard. In Paris right now, we do a lot of sushi business. However, it's so funny. They're so proud. They'll eat the sushi because there's no substitute, but they won't buy sake. They drink wine. So kind of weird. So ending. Sushi exporting a culinary culture, the sublime capturing the America's wonder in dining and lifestyle, mindset and identity. Thank you for listening.
And Shawn, can I join you? Have a seat here.
Sure.
Thank you so much. And thank you all of the speakers for staying on time.
Oh,
Didn't
is
have
it?
to police you at all. Does anyone need to use the restroom?
No.
Okay. So I'm going to sit down.
Okay.
So what we're going to do now for about 20 minutes or so is to have a kind of discussion. I'll lead a discussion with the speakers and ask them some questions, and they can feel free, each speaker, to ask your own question as well, especially when I'm finished with mine. But before we get into our discussion, I want to ask Shawn to maybe have an addendum to his talk in which he can explain why did Akio Morita feel it was necessary to donate so much money to the Japanese American National Museum? What was his connection to Nikkei?
So when Morita-san decided that he had to go overseas to make a success story, and he came to America, he was helped by a number of Japanese American leaders, primarily first off in Hawaii, with some families there, and here on the West Coast, and latterly in New York. He found that cohort would really understand what he was trying to do. He understood that they would know his cultural affinity to the way he was running his business, which was different from the way most Americans run it. And it was a thing, it helped him tremendously. The names escape me right now, excuse me, because I'm not young anymore either. But it was a way for Morita-san to make his way into the American experience. Latterly in his career, he was always the champion for hiring local talent. Sony was probably the only Japanese company which would routinely have a European running European subsidiaries, have an American run American subsidiaries, having Latin Americans run subsidiaries in Latin America. Morrison felt that there was no substitution for local knowledge. And he felt that if he just brought a bunch of Japanese executives over and scattered them across the planet, they could be successful, but it would take longer. They could be successful, but you make more mistakes. And they could be successful, but you wouldn't get a community feeling in your subsidiaries. The subsidiaries wanted to be owners and operators of their own future, and I think Japanese Americans and the Nikkei community helped him achieve that, certainly here in America.
Great, thank you. So let me start the first question for everyone on the panel, except for maybe Saori, but I'm going to start with your slide, the first slide you showed of the conflict between the U.S. during the kind of trade wars between U.S. and Japan in the 1980s. Oftentimes when we think about U.S.-Japan relations or the history of the U.S. and Japan, we think about war, we think about conflict, we think about trade disputes, we think about, in my case, immigration, issues around immigration conflict. But you folks, you three panelists are giving us the other side in many ways of U.S.-Japan relations, talking about cultural and business cooperation in many ways. But I'm sure, like in the case with Bruce or your father, who, by the way, a lot of the images that Atsuko showed were from a wonderful LA Times series. What was that, last year it came out, last May or something?
Yes.
About the history of sushi and how Los Angeles is right at the center of the history of the sushi boom in the U.S. And there were many articles, one about your father, but many others as well, very interesting ones. So please see that. But so whether it's your father, or whether it's Morita-san and others at Sony, Shawn, so we think about the cooperation, we've heard about that, but what about some of the challenges, some of the hardships of bridging U.S.-Japan, whether it's business culture, whether it's consumer culture? We've heard some hints of that, but I wonder if you can elaborate a little bit more about some of the challenges. Go ahead.
Okay, I'll start. So, yeah, in my presentation, here's a second-generation Japanese American and Toyota executives. Those Toyota executives represented the elite of Japanese society. They graduated from Tokyo University. They came from companies like Mitsubishi Trading. They worked in the Japanese government in the Ministry of International Trade and Industry. They were involved in policy formation to help move the Japanese economy from post-war nothingness, to completely transforming it into a healthy, vibrant economy. So when those executives came here and met people like my father and other Nisei, there was sort of this leveling of the relationship. Now, there were, of course, other moments where the Japanese coming over, as their companies became more prosperous, would look at the local Japanese and go, we really don't need you anymore. When it comes to hiring, we're going to hire a white Anglo-Saxon Protestant to position ourselves in America in a different way. But at least in the 50s, 60s, I think coming out of the war, there was a window in which there were some Nisei who really were able to step up, understand that they were in a position where they understood American culture, they understood the pitfalls, they had gone through the war and they were subjected to racism and the hysteria as part of the war. And so they helped the Japanese, the early entry companies, to navigate some of these cultural nuances. And also, I think for my family, we were like first adopters. We were like first customers. On my dad's trip in 1961, he came back with a Sony transistor radio for me to listen to the LA Dodgers, Sandy Koufax, Don Drysdale, win the World Series as I was listening to them and watching them in Dodger Stadium. So I think we also helped to provide customer feedback to these companies saying, this is good, and this rice cooker is no good. And so I think that really helped, at least in that way, to get a better understanding.
Morita-san was a real fan of the United States. When he came out here, he knew this was the place to make it big. When he went to New York, with the meager amount of funds that Sony had for that type of activity, he would stay at the Waldorf Astoria because he felt if I stayed out at the Motel 6 by the airport, no one would take me seriously. So he'd stay in the Waldorf Astoria and eat crackers. So you save your money on the food bill. When they had enough money later in their career to create a showroom, he wanted it on 5th Avenue in Manhattan. He wanted to say, we are here, this is our statement, we're here to stay. His love affair with America was well known. His friendship with Tom Watson of IBM, the folks at Bell Labs, and David Rockefeller was a close friend of his as well. Latterly, when U.S.-Japan relationships got sour, Morita-san got a bit cranky because he hated to see what was happening to his relationship with America, the American-Japan relationship. But at the same time, he felt Americans were kind of the architect of their own demise. He did a lot of speaking around what he talked about the hollowing out of American industry. America was a creator economy, and then it became, in his words, a money game economy. Monozukuri was dead. It was all about how can you move money around. It really got him cranky about all those things. And he wanted to do, we built Sony factories throughout America. And as the professor showed earlier, a lot of us got vilified for building Japanese factories into America. But that was the thing to do, and it was successful. Later on, when probably the height of the US-Japan trade tension was around the time that Sony bought Columbia Pictures. Even Business Week magazine, or Newsweek magazine, excuse me, had a picture of the Columbia lady wrapped in a kimono on the front page. Because Mitsubishi had bought Rockefeller Plaza, and someone bought that golf course up north. And in an interview with Business Week, Bill Gross asked Mr. Morita, what do you say to the charge, Morita-san, that Sony is buying the soul of America? The Japanese are buying the soul of America. And Morita-san's answer was, if you don't want us to buy it, why do you put it on sale? The reporter had no good comeback to that. But it was a good pull line in his Business Week article. Later on, he got even a bit more cranky, and he created that book with Ishihara Shintaro, No Toyeru Nihon. That was really not helpful. Me having to explain to the New York Times why he did this and those types of things. Sadly, again, as we talked about earlier, his career was cut short, and he didn't see not the solution, but at least the evolution of the US-Japan relationship. But he went from a biggest fan to the biggest disappointed fan during the 80s and 90s.
Let me add something there, Shawn. What did you say to the New York Times reporter about that book?
I said it was a tie-down conversation between Shintaro and Morita-san, and yeah, it was published, and yeah, I wish he hadn't written it. And would quickly change the subject. That was David Sanger. David Sanger was the New York Times bureau chief in Tokyo at the time. And yeah, that was supremely unhelpful.
Right. In the case of food, it's a little bit different. Like I had explained, there's not much competition, but on the business side, I think when my father came permanently to the U.S. in '64, he had this vision that he was going to do business, that he was wanted, or people wanted him to come. However, when he got here, the business was failing, and wherever he went to, he didn't have much funds, and he had to go to the banks. No one would lend him any money. Now, he was the newer generation. He was, educated, didn't have money, but he had knowledge, and he had all these things that he wanted to do. However, he didn't have the resources. So there was only one bank, the Bank of Tokyo, that the original Bank of Tokyo, that did lend him some funds. But so he was really ostracized by the Japanese American community at that time. The business is good. The restaurant business was good, but as far as who is this guy coming from Japan and starting to do business, how can I trust him when there was the war and my family's been so damaged by the experiences. So that was one. The other, I think, would be no, and afterwards the Japanese Americans did turn around and start being a fan of, because they saw that it is part of their identity, and they became the biggest supporter of the business. The Japanese expats coming, they were also a big part of that. And so the food part was not hard. Developing the food, yes, but not much like your businesses were experiencing.
So here's a question. Atsuko ended her talk with this wonderful sort of framing of the cultural history of the history of Japanese culture in America and perhaps the rest of the world, and how before the war it was lacquerware and textiles and so forth, and after the war maybe bicycles, cameras, automobiles, etc. And then sushi. and then sushi. So I'm wondering, in all of your cases, I'm thinking about a large sort of big cultural history of, or history of Japanese culture in America. Was there you mentioned Shogun, the movie, the first one, now there's a second, right, in 1980. Was there a turning point when your father or Akio Morita felt like, oh, we've made it in the US. Now our products have caught on, we have a secure future, and America is becoming more Japanese in that sense?
May I answer that?
Yes,
please.
I don't know what year it was. Okay, sushi restaurants were all over the U.S., but it wasn't really in the American businesses. But there was one year when President Reagan welcomed Prime Minister Nakasone to L.A., Los Angeles. So I don't know what year it is. And they had a huge welcome party at the Century City Plaza. And the hotel people said, okay, sushi. So my father said, oh, we made it. You know, it's going into the American mainstream with presidents and prime ministers. Well, he hired, he made sure that all the restaurateurs were there, they're making sushi all day long and laying it out on platters. And what happened was that the servers saw the sushi and said, oh, what's this? Oh, it's sushi. Let's have a few. And by the time they were finished, half of the sushi were gone. And my father was upset, and yet he said, oh, you know, we made it.
It's gone mainstream.
Right.
Servers
Right.
are. And Atsuko and I were talking because she's an alum of USC. When Saori and I started around the same year at USC, about 30 years ago. And in 1995, there used to be a sushi bar. Remember, Saori, here on campus? Not in this building, when we had the old building for the student union. And I thought, wow, there's a sushi bar on a college campus. I really chose the right job. Here. I thought that was really cool. But Atsuko doesn't remember it being there, or John, it probably wasn't there when you were in school in the 80s, right?
No.
So something happened when sushi became so common. It was on college
That
campuses.
was January 2nd, 1985.
1985.
Sony
Oh,
came to
thank
LA
you.
to talk with Reagan.
John,
Thank you very much.
when did Bruce think that Toyota actually made it?
Oh, so after my mom complained and she finally got a new car, it was a few cars later that she agreed to get a Toyota. And I think when she started driving it and she said, you know what, this is a good car and I like it. And she started talking to the other moms who saw her driving it around Torrance, Gardena, the South Bay. And they were selling. And it was, after the kind of the oil shock and gas prices went up. So it became not just economical, but the designs also began to change and get better. So I think that started probably in the maybe late 60s, early 70s. And that's when I think, using my mom as the example, she did feel like she was getting like the nokorimono, the leftovers. Here's your Toyota.
Yeah, the Cadillac.
Yeah, and then it was around that time that my dad stopped driving Cadillacs. Then we knew it was the circle had.
And did Bruce drive Japanese cars or Toyotas for the rest of his life then?
That's when he started making the switch, and so when he bought his first Lexus, then we knew. Yeah, right.
Okay.
There's a number of moments probably for Sony that Mori-san might have felt they made it. It might have been, we talked about the Fifth Avenue showroom, when he opened that up. I mean, that's like, you make it there, you make it anywhere. It may be the New York Times Magazine where he's embracing Cyndi Lauper, which we all love. Mrs. Morita, not so much. But probably the one concrete point in time when Sony really felt they made it was in September of 1970, when it became the first Japanese company listed on the New York Stock Exchange. And he's there on the NYSE floor, ringing the bell, and Sony becomes the first Japanese to be listed there. Shortly thereafter, one of the ad campaigns, we had a great ad agency in the 70s and 80s for Sony, and they came up with probably the most iconic tagline for the company was just, "It's a Sony." Yeah, that's all you had to say. And all the quality and innovation and technology and goodness could be expressed in just, it's a Sony. We had that tagline for 25 years. I still don't know why we ever changed it. Nothing is as perfect as that.
Saori, I want to ask if you have any questions for the panelists.
I'm actually wondering about sushi, where
You're getting me
now
hungry
there
now.
are like reverse export from like California rolls and things that get adopted and invented in an American style, now being part of Japanese cuisine. How do you feel about these? Kind of, it's not one directional. I think it's kind of a mutual.
Right.
So do you see influence of Japanese culture adopted in the U.S. going back to Japan in some ways?
It's not only sushi, it's the whole Japanese food. What you see here in the U.S., you might think, oh, Matsuhisa-san, Nobu, as the epitome of traditional Japanese food. It's not. He doesn't make traditional Japanese food. His discipline is based on Japanese food. However, in order to make it successful in the U.S., he's had to change it. He used American techniques and ingredients. It's more like California style. And that's happening not only in Japanese food, but French food. You can't find too many traditional French food anymore because no one will eat all those heavy sauces and so forth. So it's all changing, and Japan is changing too, where the traditional sushi does exist, but they have to change in order to keep their consumers happy in Japan as well. So it's a whole culinary transition from we're all conscious about health, so becoming lighter, being fresher, smaller portions instead of one big meal, and so forth. So it's the industry, I think, and having and also the chefs. Chefs are breaking rules, meaning advancing. Even if a person is trained in French cooking, they are not doing the traditional. They are advancing that as well, in order to appeal to the current consumer, or else they will be out of business. So yes, they are.
Thank you.
The number two restaurant in Latin America is called Maido. He's in Lima, Peru. And he is number 2 in Latin America, and he is a very creative Japanese cuisine, as well as infusing Peruvian foods as well. So he's a person to watch.
Now's the time for you folks, for the audience, to raise questions.
Gotta go. Gotta go.
Please.
Okay. Hi. Well, first question is for Shawn. 2 questions, actually. From your observation, what was the relationship between Akio Morita and Steve Jobs? And second question, who is today's Akio Morita?
The second question, I'll let Sone-san address this. Steve Jobs is famously known to have had a desire to be like Sony. When he was building Apple back in the day, he looked at Sony, particularly around design, because Steve was crazy about physical design, about simplicity, about the user experience before he even used the term UX, about user interface before he used the term UI. He saw a lot of that in Sony, is what he liked. There wasn't a real connection between the two people privately. I think they met maybe 2 or 3 times, if that. But there was certainly a mutual admiration for what they were doing. And later in life, a bunch of Apple guys jumped off. They made a company called General Magic, and Sony worked with them on making early versions of PDAs, pocket digital assistants, and that type of thing. So there's a lot of crossover in the ethics or the ethos around what they're trying to create, but not really that much personal contact. And who's the Akio Morita of today? I think that position is still left unfilled.
SoftBank.
Son Masayoshi.
Nisei and then next.
Hi, I'm Nisei Matsumoto. I'm a PhD student at the
department here at USC. Thank you to all the panelists and discussants for this really fascinating, valuable talk, and also to the ASC. This is really great. I've just learned a lot. I was wondering if you could comment a little bit about what, like, grounded in your sort of vantage point in your field industry, what kind of gave Japan such a competitive edge during the 70s and 80s? Because, and this is kind of a big question that a lot of people have grappled with. You know, some people point to technology, to industrial policy, to bureaucracy, geopolitics, et cetera, and other people point to, you know, American ineptitude essentially as well. And I was just curious, like, because you're all kind of at this vantage point of seeing, both being, you know, in the United States and seeing what's happening in the United States with rapid inflation, unemployment, et cetera, but also seeing how Japan is having this incredible boom. I was wondering if you could just talk a little bit about, from your vantage point, what were some of the sources of that in your professional field, and what are some lessons for both Americans and Japanese today from that period, the 70s and 80s?
Well, thanks. Yeah, I feel pressure. Okay. Well, thanks for the question. As I look back, and also as a local elected official try and look ahead, I see that the U.S.-Japan relationship has been a point of creativity, and that has helped move both economies forward over the course of time. So when I think back to the 70s and I look at, let's say, the automotive area, where Toyota introduced economical cars that got greater gas mileage than Detroit products, they filled a need, a very felt need here in the United States and in the global market. And it also caused Detroit to step up. And I've seen that across the board, whether it's in manufactured goods, whether it's in technology, you know, every different sphere. And as I look at the interchange, and I've been involved in this, you know, in this area for a number of years now, and my family as well. I look at that as this is a very healthy relationship. It's a very friendly relationship, but it's also a very competitive relationship. But I think that mix of creativity, competition, is a great dynamic to maintain. And I think both sides have a good understanding of how to manage that relationship so that it doesn't fly off the rails like in World War II. So I think it also serves as a great example for other countries who may have been experiencing conflict, both in the past and also recently. What can mortal enemies aspire to in a friendlier relationship? And is there a more positive outcome? So I'm kind of expanding on what you asked, but I do believe that if people, you know, those of you who are students, those of you who are working, can take a different look at the U.S.-Japan relationship, I really believe it creates a great model globally. And I would encourage, you know, your pursuits, you know, in history and the in bilateral relationship, because I think there's always new information that can be mined from this relationship.
Let's go. Great question, and it's super layered. It's the answer to that question is probably a one-semester course here at USC for 3 credits. But just a couple of things you can observe in this sphere. I think in the 70s and the 80s, the U.S. underestimated the abilities of Japan. U.S. was king of the world. U.S. was the only superpower left after World War II. And went around and helped rebuild Europe and helped rebuild Japan. That's what we do. And I got complacent in this leadership position and was not expecting Japan to recover so quickly, and not only recover, but then do leapfrog into the future. There was a time probably back in the 1950s or 60s where there were at least 25 US television manufacturers. 25 different TVs you could buy, made in America. And by the time Sony came on the scene, and certainly the 70s, 80s, it was Zenith and maybe RCA was left. They'd all moved on to other places. They found those kinds of electronics were commodities. There was no great margin to be made. You were just going to go to the lowest common denominator and moved on and let them import them from overseas. Sony rode that wave and came in and said, not only can we get you better pricing, we'll get you a better product. And how is that done in Japan? I think the cohesive nature of Japanese society really helps people to work together. People cooperate a lot more than they fight. That has good sides and bad sides, because sometimes you need a good argument. And in my experience in corporate, arguments were to be avoided, and everyone's supposed to be really nice about things. But that cohesiveness, that desire to come back, it's always great to be the challenger. You know, if you're the champion for too long, you're gonna get lazy and gonna fall asleep. I think it happened to America, and Japan came on as a huge challenger with a lot of impetus and a lot of desire to succeed there. And the way the society works cohesive is great. I think those same things turned around to be a boat anchor in the 90s when the economy turned a little bit south. Companies found themselves with way more employees than they could handle, and what are we going to do with this? The move towards consensus kind of moves away from accountability, which if everything's going great, that's fine because we're all winning. But everything starts going bad, no one wants to say, I have the loser finger. So it swings and roundabouts. And again, there's a whole semester's worth of topics to cover in this category. But more than anything else, I think the US underestimated Japan, and they got their wake-up call.
Hi. Once again, in the food, the competition is, playing field is a little bit different. And I know that, once again, in America is void of many things. It's a new country versus Europe and Asia, and people are hungry for new information, new experiences. So, you know, America, what is American food? There's not much base for that, and therefore there's a lot of places to fill the void. What really helped after Shogun was the Food Channel. People, you know, traveled to all these places, and there was a big interest in travel and food, and with that came, you know, all kinds of food from all over the place, and so this interest in food kind of morphed into a big mass following. Now we have people posting about different foods that they like, recipes and so forth. That, you know, your generation is helping to move the industry, not just industry, the movement and appreciation for food. So that's really helped. But food is really funny. It does cross borders. Let me give you one example. It's not sushi, but many years ago, help me, I don't know what year again. In Peru,
Alexa,
Consul General, in Peru, there was an invasion of a Japanese embassy in Lima, Peru, in
91? 92?
By a terrorist called Shining Light. And they took over the compounds, and for close to how many months?
Oh, 6.
96. Oh, right after Reagan. Okay, and so we were really worried. We're here in LA and they're in Lima, but the president of Lima, of Peru, was Japanese and Japanese Peruvian. So we wanted to Fujimori-san. So we wanted to help, and we said, okay, what can we help? What can we do? So we sent them cases and cases of dry Maruchan brand lunch noodles. You know, you just add water and there you go. So we sent them that, and they promptly delivered it to the embassy. Now it went to the captured, hostages, as well as the terrorists, right? And there was this one girl. She was, probably 15 years old with a machine gun. And this was documented in one of the reports, and she said, "Oh, I've never had anything so delicious."
Wow.
And what she did was she was crying. She ate one, and she had a whole case. She stuffed it in her backpack and said, "I'm going to take it back to my jungle for my brothers and sister and my parents." And Irregardless of her being a terrorist, that's how much power food has. So food, delicious food, does move people's hearts.
Can I?
Yeah, I was just thinking that when Shawn said there could be a class taught on this after
Yes.
Saori teaches that.
Yeah, so
Give us
let me
a
just
version
kind
of
of say
that.
one thing. I mean, there's a lot of different reasons in terms of the labor cost and all that, but I think the United States has given Japan a vision and a dream or aspiration to achieve in the 1960s, 1970s, and Japanese system, the society and companies and so on, are very good at sacrificing present for the future once they are given a vision and a goal. They are very good at how to get things done when the goal is clear. And that was the foundation of these efforts. People worked 16 hours a day, pretty much 7 days a week to get there. And so that's the success of the 70s and maybe into the 80s. Obviously, Japan kind of achieved it. And the challenge is, okay, what's now? Where is the goal? And that's where the, yes, the kind of economic bubble burst and all that, but that whole lack of clear vision once Japan got to where it wanted to is the challenge of the past 30 years. I mean, that's kind of a general take on my sense of the short answer to your question.
Back, yeah.
Yes, and so echoing Nisei, I just would also like to say thank you all for your time, and I also learned a lot. My first question is for Mr. John Kaji, and I ask this as a fellow Torrance native. But just considering just your talk on Toyota, did you say West High?
You're from West, right?
I am from West High, yes. But I grew up in North Torrance, so yes. Yes, sir. Definitely. But I do want to ask in the context of the auto industry and Toyota, and I just would like to know, this is more of a local question perhaps than a transnational one, but where do you see like Japanese businesses and their place in the Torrance and the South Bay? Because very recently, or perhaps within the last 5-7 years ago, I think Toyota moved to Texas. American Honda is still in Torrance. My cousin works there as a mechanic. But I just also wonder, like, where do you see, like, kind of the industry and the partnerships going? Because this matters to the community in Torrance and, like, the Japanese American community as well. We're also seeing shifts in, like, the auto industry. We're moving from, like, gasoline to EVs. Some have said this is going to like undercut Japanese manufacturers' competitive advantages. Maybe that's disputed. I was just wondering where you see things going, as speculative as that question is. Yeah.
Well, thanks for the softball question. Last week, we had a visit by the outgoing and incoming CEOs of American Honda. American Honda is headquartered in Torrance. This was the first time that we had a visit of those CEOs, American Honda CEOs, to visit the city of Torrance. Did that ever happen with Toyota Motor Sales USA? No. The city of Torrance and its leadership grew complacent. They believed that Toyota was too big to ever leave. So they felt that they really didn't need to do anything. So that relationship died of benign neglect. And so to someone like myself, to my father, when Toyota made the announcement to move to Texas, we were not surprised. In fact, we had warned the city for many, many years, you must go to visit Toyota headquarters. You must pay your respects. You must reinforce the relationship. Okay, so that was then, this is now. We have also been having interesting meetings with Japanese companies, JETRO, Government of Japan, to talk about the emerging hydrogen hub at the ports of Los Angeles and Long Beach. What is the role of sustainable energy? What is the role of hydrogen? What is the role of generating new sources of sustainable energy in Los Angeles County, and more specifically in the South Bay and in Torrance? We have a refinery Torrance Refinery. Of course, it's fossil fuel. But they're looking ahead, and here in the state of California, there is an end to the sale of gas-powered vehicles. So a transition will have to occur at the 700 acres controlled by Torrance Refinery. Is there room to add to their energy menu of products? Does that create an opportunity for those companies, including Japan, to move in to help fill the gap and to help the ports of LA and Long Beach transition from diesel power to clean power, electric, hydrogen fuel cell? Does this create new opportunities for employment? Does this create opportunities for hydrogen-powered energy generation that can support, say, for example, AI data centers here in Los Angeles County and others? And once again, looking back at the US-Japan relationship, do we have partners in Japan who already know about Torrance? And I'll say this, having served in Tokyo, the name of Torrance, I mean, people know Hollywood, but from the manufacturing business side, they know Torrance. So for myself as a council member and as a Nikkei on the council and representing, all the Japanese Americans, Asian Americans in Torrance, I think it's just a great advantage for us, and I'd be stupid not to step up and to push this. So with that, thank you for your vote, and I look forward to
Thank you.
Yes.
Hi, so thank you all for your presentation. I really enjoyed learning all these great things about how Japanese companies manage to enter the US market. And I have one question for Mr. John Kaji.
Oh, gee.
And the other one for Mr. Shawn Layden. So for the first question, I have a Toyota Corolla in my garage, and I definitely will view her in a different eyes after listening to your talk today. And I bought it because I thought that car was like the most car-ish car. It's the prototypical car that has all things that a car should have and nothing more than that. And in that sense, I wonder, since you are talking about the struggles of Japanese companies, automobile companies in the US, I wonder, what about other Japanese companies such as Honda and also about Nisei? Did they experience the same struggle in the US when they're trying to embark on the US market? Or did they have a different story to tell? And also, were those companies competing with each other to obtain a higher market share? Or did they try to support each other to elevate the status of Japanese company in the US? Okay, so that's a question for you, Mr. Kaji.
Okay.
And for Mr. Layden. My question is why do you think there is such a high customer loyalty for Sony products? Even though many of my friends admit that there are a lot of substitutes in the market that are even better than Sony products, but many of them will still choose to buy Sony, anything from Sony, despite the fact that they are going to pay a higher price for that. And do you have any hypothesis for this? Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay.
He said you're first.
Yeah. Okay. So there was a time when Toyota, Nissan, and Honda were all headquartered in the South Bay. Carson, Gardena, Torrance. And so the competition, 60s, 70s, 80s, between those three as well as with the Detroit firms, was fierce and ongoing. Eventually, Nissan moved to Ohio and Toyota to Texas. But I think for those of us in Torrance who saw all three, and they employed many people in the region, many people from the Japanese, Asian American community, and larger community. There was a lot of happy hours where guys from all the different firms would get together, start drinking, start exchanging ideas. Some may not, maybe they shouldn't have exchanged ideas, but I think that, so, once again, it's the 70s, 80s, yeah. But it was a really exciting time because those ideas that were exchanged found their way back to their headquarters in Japan. And so these were constantly bouncing back and forth. I still see that present. But it's not so much centered on automotive now. I think we now see other industry groups coming into this LA County, coming into the South Bay. As I mentioned, hydrogen, that's one area. But I really, and as Atsuko mentioned, and she talks about food and sushi and sake and shochu and all those things. I think that mixing of everything together, I mean, going out at night and doing this, and you're talking to all your friends, it really does. I mean, I don't know, whether I'm here or in Tokyo or anywhere, that really helps to move things forward. So I'm sorry to give you that kind of fuzzy response, but
He is a politician after all.
yes. Okay, Shawn.
Okay. Your question is around the concept of brand loyalty.
Yeah.
And Sony did a lot of work in that, and I think it comes down to really just a handful of core principles. First and foremost is quality. Put the time and make the quality product. Don't go for the cheap, I sell 100 things for a nickel, sell one thing for $50. That's kind of the way I have to look at it. And because through that brand loyalty, a lot of it is based on the quality. If the quality is good, then you have positive reinforcement. I made this choice, I feel good about my choice. That means I must be a smart person for buying this, so I feel better about myself because I didn't buy a stupid thing. And you feel good about that. And what makes you feel good about that? Because the product you bought, it could be a TV, it could be a Walkman, it could be a PlayStation. It delights you. It takes care of a thing you need. I want to watch TV. I want to play a game. I want to listen to music. It's functional, but it delights you. You're delighted by your choice, by the way it looks, by the way it feels. Sony design is second to none as far as its physical feeling and the materials that they use. It makes you want to have more of that in your life. And it's not just a Japanese thing. I think other brands, Rolex, that has the same, people are delighted by their choice of Rolex. People are delighted by their choice of Nike. Again, it's just the quality, create the positive reinforcement, and be sure to delight the people who buy it. Because again, they'll feel they're really smart for doing it.
Okay, we had a question over here, and we have time for maybe 2 more questions after this.
Kind of just a few comments from a third generation Japanese American whose parents were in camp when they were just married. And as I was growing up, many of my friends' parents would not do things Japanese. Some of them don't even eat chopsticks. My parents were very adamant about learning Japanese values and things like that. And I grew up at the age of 8. I started doing kendo, Japanese fencing, in the Torrance, Gardena, South Bay area. And I still do today. I teach today. But the comment I want to make is that as doing that, we grew up learning to eat Japanese food. My dad bought a transistor radio in mid-1960s. It was a Sony. I snuck it out of the house, took it to elementary school with me so we could listen to the Dodgers, which is the Twins World Series. He bought one of the first early Japanese cars. So the other thing though is, on the other hand, growing up Japanese, I ate sashimi like once a week. But then, I'm sorry, Atsuko, but as the sushi became more popular and things like that, sashimi became very expensive. So when my mom said to me as a young boy, we can't eat sashimi once a week anymore, it's like, why? It's because we can't afford it. And now, today, I can't go to a good ramen restaurant without having to wait 2 hours to get in there, right? And now, on the new Shogun, the newest episode had them eating natto.
Right.
And yes. So now my wife's going to complain because natto's going to be expensive.
She can hook you up. It's
So, it's great that we have, and growing up in Torrance, all these Japanese companies, and all the Japanese markets and everything was great. But now it's become so popular that it's like I can't afford it anymore. So there's kind of, for me, it feels like there's a give and take, being Sansei, growing up Japanese American. But the other thing was, doing Kendo and trying to help it grow within the United States. I was a Southern California Kendo Federation president. I was a vice president of the All United States Kendo Federation. And when we went to the large Japanese companies to get nonprofit, because we're nonprofit, donations, we were basically told that what you're doing is too Japanese. And so, you know, it's difficult for us to support you because the Toyotas or whatever want to be known as an American company. So it's a little bit frustrating at the same time. So that's just a comment. I don't know if you want to make any comments on that.
I don't like natto, so I'm not driving your prices. I'm not driving your prices up, Dave, not me.
But certainly Sony and Toyota wanted to appeal to the masses of the U.S. and maybe with the name itself didn't want to be identified as one particular type of country or from that region or Japan.
I think you point out a point of conflict. We have many large Japanese companies here, but when it comes to their connecting with the local community, it's not always there. I see it, and I've experienced that. So I think our community needs to do a better job of communicating why that's important, why it's significant. There are historical reasons for maintaining that relationship, and going forward, there may be times where their companies or their products may be subject to conflict, and they need friends. So how do you manage that conflict if you don't have local friends on the ground to stand up for you? So I think it requires face-to-face contact with those executives and making that pitch.
Going out of okay.
You got it, yeah.
Okay, maybe the last question, please.
Yeah, I guess. So maybe Dr. Katada, if you could kind of tee it up. So when you showed the graph where Japan is now the U.S.'s largest foreign direct investor, it's quite different from 7 years ago, like when John was talking about when Toyota was first coming in.
Mm.
So on the one hand, kind of acknowledging how Japan's economic and business situation is very different, today. And I guess the other is looking at the Japanese American community where, like the Nisei generation had a very particular, perfectly bicultural value proposition, I would say, to Japanese businesses. And, the Japanese businesses were at that point of trying to break in. So looking today at how some like myself, being, Yonsei, are very far away from Japan and Japanese language as one subset of the current Japanese American, but you also have kind of a new, like probably there are a handful of people here whose parents are from Japan, who are, the Shin Nisei or Shin Nisei kind of newer group of Japanese Americans. So what does Japan need now from the Japanese American community, both from those who are more historically far away from Japan and those who are a lot more connected? It's just kind of a general question.
Should I? Yeah, very profound question. I myself been living in the U.S. for 37 years now. I grew up in Japan. I was 25 when now you can tell my age, but so I guess I'm a Shin Nisei, am I? So my daughter is a Shin Nisei, and kind of think about how my connection is, how my daughter's connection is back to Japan. So that's really, kind of profound for me too. Just thinking about Japan though, so the change over the course of last 30, 40 years, Japan itself is quite dramatic. Japan is a country that changes slowly, but these 30 years has been significant. And also the way that globalization kind of sink into many of these societies, Japan has gotten quite, a bit more, much more global than when they are starting to talk about internationalization in the 1970s and 1980s. So in many ways, the connection are more in some ways, But at the same time, unfortunately, kind of the inward-lookingness of Japan is also there. So there is kind of a bifurcation, maybe, of Japanese society taking place. And, kind of people from outside going back to Japan, or the connection that Japanese Americans or whoever grew up around the world, but connected to Japan in some ways, would be a very important component or important element in kind of putting these bifurcated Japan back together, or it's a kind of a bridge that you can build. So I feel like this is really what Japan needs very much. Now I'm very frustrated at USC. We have a lot of Chinese students and Korean students, but very few Japanese students. And they would probably love to come, but they are intimidated, or they have much kind of immediate concerns that they really can't see broadly. And people like you, who's grew up in a kind of Japanese context, but not exactly the same way as the Japanese kids, who grew up and never really left the country. I think this would be a very important moment for that to take place. Obviously businesses are now trying to internationalize, and some of the companies are now having meetings in English, and all that is taking place. Meanwhile, some of that isolationist, well, I don't know how to call it, like inward-looking mentality is still kind of lingering quite significantly. So I'm not giving anything concrete, but I think that's the environment where we are in. Thank you.
Any final thoughts from anybody on anything?
It's the one question the gentleman asked that I kind of put onto the Consul General, and we kind of had a laugh about it. Asking who's the next Akio Morita?
Yeah.
Who's the current Akio Morita? You think about Akio Morita's time. Throughout Japan, you had people like Matsushita Konosuke, you had Honda-san, you had Toyota-san, Morita-san. That phoenix rising from the ashes of World War II desire to remake our country and remake it better and to build new things. That was an incredible moment in Japan in the 60s, 50s and 60s, where companies like that, with leadership as described, were able to create a new economy for all of Japan. Sadly, as you saw with America, everything shifts in time. You do a lot of winning, then you start to take your eye off the ball, and then all of a sudden, good enough is good enough. And I think we need a second explosion in Japan, where we have another series of entrepreneurs who can start to bring newness to Japan. In Japan, it's hard to be an entrepreneur. Venture capital rules and regulations and how you get the money in is hard to do. And so I think we have to find a way to get the Japanese economy to learn a bit more from Silicon Valley and learn a bit more from California on how we can incentivize the next generation of leaderships, both in technology and in business in Japan. And I'm just still waiting to see who's going to step up and do it.
You use this term, take your eye off the ball. At this moment, I would say the most globally recognized Japanese individual is a certain baseball player on his way back to Los Angeles. Now, I've had interesting discussions in Torrance, once again going back to the late hours, about what role someone like Shohei Ohtani might play, not just in the sport of baseball, but in other areas. What exactly that means right now, I'm not sure, but we're beginning to have these discussions about beyond his 10 years with the Dodgers, what might be next? What will be created as a result of his experience here with the Dodgers and in Major League Baseball? What values does he project? Japanese values? What type of work ethic? How does he interface with people, fans? And what will that mean for Japan? What will that mean for the United States and the global community? We don't know, because once I get past so many beers and everything begins to fade. But I really appreciate these discussions and what that might mean for Los Angeles, what that might mean for a university like USC, because USC is right here in the middle, right between Dodger Stadium and the city of Torrance. So I have to think that for the university, maybe this creates an opportunity to reestablish and broaden the brand of USC in Japan. I don't know, but that's why people like Glenn Osaki are here. And that's why East Asian Studies Center is an important place to be. And I hope that, going forward, we can, everyone here can begin to think of how we ride this Otani wave and do it in a different way, going back to the Sony days, the Toyota days, sushi and Japanese food, and how can we can be creative about this new trend.
I think that's a great way to stop. Our panelists will be here for a little bit if you want to come down and chat with them.